And welcome into episode 4 of Diving for Penalties. We're back after a week off to focus more on the television side of soccer that I had to put some time into. Of course, my name is Nick Goulis, the host here at Diving for Penalties. You can follow me along on Twitter at Nick_Goulis. And, of course, you can follow the show at Yellow4Dive. And this week with us, we have a very special guest, the man behind the idea behind this podcast to begin with, and he's also a Aston Villa fan / sufferer, Salt Lake supporter. Mr. Josh Zavidal is here with us.
I am present at this moment.
That is always good to be. So Josh is going to join us here as we talk all the excitement as the World Cup is approaching. Everywhere you look now, there has been World Cup this, World Cup there. The promotion in this country for the biggest tournament in the world has been ratcheted up to levels that even 4 years ago probably were unseen or unheard of. And I think there's a lot of excitement going around even for those people that don't really follow soccer that intently.
Yeah, I think definitely the United States run in the last World Cup has a lot to do with the excitement coming into this World Cup because fans, whether they were casual fans or very devoted fans, saw what this team is capable of doing, and that they do have the talent to hang with the best of the best in the biggest tournament, the best tournament in the world. And I think that's just made the build up to the next one that much more here.
And of course, we all know that the hill that they face this year is the steepest in the tournament, more or less. And so we'll get into that a few more weeks down the road. But first, let's just look at this roster that Jurgen Klinsmann has put together. Of course, the roster was announced last Monday, and first thing that stood out to me was 15 MLS players. Half of this preliminary roster is from the domestic league, and that's something, before we start getting into the who's who of it, there's a lot to ride on this World Cup just based on that number alone. There's a lot that can be done for the domestic league just based on their performance going forward. And I think that overall, regardless of how they perform, I think the biggest impact on anything will be on the domestic league and their performance, because if they can escape this group, the overall view worldwide of MLS is going to skyrocket.
I hadn't thought about that. This has to be like more than any of the other previous World Cups since the MLS has been in existence, right?
This is the highest tally from MLS. The next closest league is actually the Bundesliga and the Premier League with 4.
That's incredible.
So this is a very domestic team. Of course, it helps to have Michael Bradley and Clint Dempsey coming back stateside in the last year or so, but still, the names that are on this list have all been developed or being developed here locally. Even the younger guys. It's the gamut of the age ranges on this team.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it earlier, but depending upon how they do in this World Cup, it's going to speak very largely of the view of MLS going forward, because this is an opportunity not just in America but worldwide to showcase the talent from this country and show that the MLS isn't necessarily the laughing stock that some people, at least in the soccer world, have viewed it as. And
so going forward now, we look at the roster. What are your initial thoughts when you look at the 30-man roster?
No Breck Shea.
We'll get to that, all right?
That's not what you were looking for.
We're not ripping that Band-Aid off yet.
Oh, man. I like it, and I think seems like there's a lot of defenders called into the 30-man roster, but I think that's a need that Klinsmann had to address, and so you have to bring in a lot of options for this training camp for the preparation to the World Cup, so you can find out who is going to shore up your defense, because at least in my opinion, that's been one of the struggles for the team, has been their defensive play. And
you look at this list, though, DeMarcus Beasley is obviously your anchor from this group. And then the other 10 guys listed, they all have a chance to either make it to Brazil and start or get cut here in the next 2 weeks. There's no real guarantee on this back line. And in a group that the U.S. has, that is a scary proposition.
It really is. And I also it seems seems like there's a lot of youth in this core, I guess, group of defenders that have been brought along. But that is an interesting point, And Beasley really is the only one, I guess, when you think about it, who has kind of pinned down his spot.
And you look through this list, and like you mentioned, the youth. Yedlin is in there. Timmy Chandler's only 24. Omar Gonzalez has been brought along through this round, and all three of those guys could make this team. Mm-hmm. I mean, Yedlin was, I think, a bit of a surprise for an inclusion in this group, because when you think of the youth of the men's national team, he's been on the fringe here for the last couple of call-ups, but he hadn't really made it, and then all of a sudden he really appears out of nowhere when the World Cup is coming to question.
Yeah, and it'll be, he's going to get a chance. He and Chandler will get a chance to show what they have to Klinsmann. So, it'll be interesting.
And the fun with Timmy Chandler, he hasn't played for the U.S. in 15 months. He's fought through injuries. He hasn't been called up. And again, another guy. Here he is in camp, and he's got the chance to make a statement. And I think that's one thing that, as you'll see here through camp in the next couple of weeks, and then also that Azerbaijan match on the 27th, is I wouldn't be surprised if Klinsmann uses half of his subs, 3 of the 6, on that back line throughout that Azerbaijan game, just to see who works where, who works with what, and that's going to be the biggest experiment, I think, that you see in the build-up send-off matches.
Yeah, I think that's what you have to do. If you're going to bring in that many defenders and realize that is a need for your team, you've got to use those build-up games to, put moving pieces everywhere and figure out what works. Yeah.
And now, the other side of the line, we're going up to the front line, because the U.S., if anything, is solid in the middle. Mm-hmm. They have some of the best midfielders that you could really ask for when it comes to soccer, and they've always done well on the international stage. But up front now, do you have any concerns looking at this list, just based on their previous form, both in league play and with their club teams?
Please, Josie, just please. Please, for the love of everything, Josie. We've seen Landon Donovan and Clint Dempsey perform at a high level on the international stage. I have no doubts that those two they're really not the question marks, I don't think. We know they're going to be ready. But I think at least for me, there are a lot of, some question marks surrounding Josie, considering, I guess, the way his season has gone. And then, I like the addition of Wondolowski, just because in the time he's played with the United States recently, he's been very effective. And I think that's a thing they're going to need, that kind of continuity with this team that Klinsmann's been playing with. I think that's going to be important for them, and it'll be interesting to see if he's able to carve out a role.
And I think this is actually rewarding Wando for his play recently. You look at what Klinsmann said in his press conference about the roster spot, and quote, he built his own case, referring to Wondolowski, and he built it stronger and stronger. We're looking forward to working with Wando because it's always a pleasure to have him in camp. He is a competitor. He is determined. You give him a 1% chance, and he wants to make it 100% at the end of the day. And the guy's a workhorse. Mm-hmm. And what he's done in the last year, and just the goal-scoring tier he's been on, and it just helps because he's the kind of guy that when you need a goal, he's giving them the goal. And with the midfield that can spring him forward, a poacher's fine. And that's really what Wando is. You can't really create his own shot, but when you have Michael Bradley trying to serve the ball forward to you, you really don't have to do much work, just make the right run.
And you've come around on him and that opinion recently too.
A little bit. I think that the U.S. needs forwards that can create for themselves. Right. It's nice to have that springboard through the middle, but you can't just rely on, pouncing off of rebounds. And I think that when we start talking about who gets cut, I think he comes up just because you start looking into it and, does Klinsmann want a poacher or does he want somebody that can create? And I think once you get going down the line throughout the forwards, that's going to be one of the other concerns that you look at. And you mentioned Josie. And Klinsmann, has brushed off his season. His manager from Sunderland has brushed off his season, saying, it didn't work, but sometimes it doesn't work. What does he have to do? I think that this is perfect for him because a midfield is what he lacks at Sunderland. I think it's apples and oranges if you're trying to compare his club season to what he can do for the national team.
True, and that's obviously not something I took into consideration. But I think you're right. It is going to be good for him, and he too has proven that he can compete and perform at a high level on the international stage. And I mean, yes, he had I guess you could call it underwhelming season with Sunderland, but I think you've got to pull that apart and look at them through a different lens and give it some perspective. What he was facing, and it's two completely different situations.
Yeah. Before we go on to who gets cut this next round, let's start talking about who got cut the first time. Eddie Johnson is obviously the biggest name that's been left off this roster. Mr. Pay Me from a year ago after Dempsey was brought to Seattle, he hasn't scored a goal yet for DC United, so he's obviously not – Klinsmann has taken that into account here.
Yeah.
But you look at, Eddie Johnson versus Josie Altidore, and you kind of wonder what differences does Klinsmann see between these two guys with, both of them having, quote-unquote, subpar seasons so far.
That is interesting, and I hadn't really put that together. I actually didn't even realize, notice that he had been left off of this. But, I mean, he's put together some fine for performances for the United States as well. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I guess, is this just a testament to the fact that Klinsmann has more faith in Josie overall?
Yeah. And he touched on that a little bit also in that press conference the day after the selections were announced. He said it has to do a little bit with the fact that we take 6 forwards into the 30-man roster, and in those forwards, I also see Landon Donovan competing for one of those spots as opposed to a midfielder. That takes away one spot automatically, and I think that partly hurt Eddie. At the same time, I always recognize Eddie's values and strength overall, not only by scoring very important goals for us, getting us to Brazil, but also he is a player that can make a difference within seconds of being on the field if it's scoring a goal or making an assist. You try to make them understand that there are little things that move a coach toward this or that player. And you hear that, and you just wonder, what are those little things? You start wondering, is it off-the-field stuff? I mean, there have been off-the-field issues with other players through the men's national team under Klinsmann, and they've all been ironed out. But you look at the timing, that this is coming around, and you have to wonder if off-the-field Eddie Johnson is affecting on-the-field Eddie Johnson when it comes to being left off this 30-man roster.
Yeah, and with comments like those, I mean, it's kind of – there's something there. Whether he's rubbed somebody the wrong way or just – I mean, it could – I don't think it could be couldn't not be as simple as just personal preference over who they think gives them the better chance to succeed.
It could easily be that. But then you also have to wonder why the personal preference falls in favor of – Aaron Johansson or Terrence Boyd over Eddie Johnson. And I think Terrence Boyd kind of is the more surprising selection.
Well, that's the one when I saw that name, I was like, okay.
Yeah. And I think that, and you wonder how that play out. And, of course, I think Aaron Johansson and Chris Wondolowski, those two guys supplanting Eddie, I think is one of the biggest surprises. Also on the cut list, as you brought up early, just trying to get me riled up on my own podcast, not even 2 minutes in, Breck Shea and his hair is nowhere to be found.
Heavy sigh, heavy sigh, heavy sigh.
The problem is, though, you look at the midfield, and who is he going to – that's the thing. Who is a guy that in the last year has flicked off his own fans and been sent on loan and then was sent back because they didn't like him enough? And who does he supplant when you look at a list of midfielders that you have available to the United States? There's no one that – and you look at this list and you're like, it'd be nice to have him, but I don't want to lose anybody here.
Right. I mean, and that's why he's not there, because this midfield core that I'm looking at right now, I mean, just going down the list, Beckerman, Bedoya, Bradley, Corona, Davis, Diskerud, Edu, Green, Jones, Zusi, that's about as solid as you can ask for in terms of what I could have hoped the United States put together. And you're right. I mean, looking at that group, I can't think of one. Like, yes, I like him as a player, and I think his hair is awesome, and so do you. But I can't really make an argument for putting him in over one of those guys.
And then another name that at least stood out to me, but of course he's been off the radar. Just it's not so much that he didn't make this roster. It's kind of looking at where he was 8 years ago to where he is now, and that's Gucci Onyewu, too. And the Gucci Onyewu train is just left the station, fallen off the tracks, just, great balls of fire, just gone up in flames. It's just from where he was the guy that was going to carry the U.S. national team for years to come at the World Cup as the backline anchor, and he's just nowhere to be found.
Pew! Gone.
Yeah, just nowhere to be found. And another quote from Klinsmann on the subs. He brings up Michael Orozco, who's also not here. Tim Ream was just named Player of the Year for Bolton, not here. He also brought up Breck Shea and then Edgar Castillo, who had a good year with Tijuana, and Sasa Kleistan, who's played an important role in previous years for this team.
He's been a Klinsmann favorite, it seemed like.
And they're all not here. And I start to wonder, at least, where did the U.S. men's national team get a pool of players that you start wondering how, you get 6 or 7 deep in the list of guys that don't make it, and you're like,
why?
Yeah. And it's a good problem to have, but at the same time, you wonder, how did they get here? And it sucks for these guys because and these are names that it's not just that one guy who's just, I remember him.
And the big one for me is Onyewu, because he was, an integral part in this team's success for a good number of years. And then, like you said, injuries, I guess knee injuries, just spiraled him downwards, and he hasn't been able to, I guess, recover and get back to form. And that when I was looking at the list, that is the first name I looked for, was did they include him? Are they giving him a shot? Because I knew that he had not been up to form.
Right. He had been on the fringe recently.
Right.
Yes.
So that's the first name I looked for, and then I didn't see it. And obviously, as we know now, he didn't get the call.
No. And now, so we look at the second line of cuts. Who do you see getting cut here? They have to take off 7. Goalkeepers are solid. You get your 3, and you're going to keep your 3.
Which, by the way, in a world where Nick Raimondo is your third goalkeeper, yes, please.
Yeah, there's a reason why the backline issues don't scare people as much as they do, and it's because you have Brad Guzan, Tim Howard, and Nick Raimondo as the 3 guys net minding for you. There are definitely worse problems to have. The U.S. national team has those problems, but there are worse problems to have. But I look at this list, and I think what will be interesting is to see how Klinsmann uses this camp. Is this camp meant to bring in young guys to be like, hey, in 4 years, this is what to expect. This is when we get into big tournament preparations, here's the format to look to. Or is he actually going to include some of these guys who are, just starting their careers with the national team and kind of chop off some guys that you're going to, again, your jaw's going to hit the floor that like, holy crap, that guy's not here. And Klinsmann talked about how Julian Green and DeAndre Yedlin are part of this 30-man roster, and he's challenging them. He admits he is challenging them. He is saying, here is your chance. What can you do?
And Green is one of the ones when I was looking that caught my eye because, this is a pretty recent development with him being, I guess, cap-tied to the United States.
He has 1 cap.
Right.
He has 1. He is fresh out of a box. He can barely drive, vote, buy cigarettes, all that stuff. He can't drink legally. He has 1 cap, and he is in this camp. And he just,
talent alone, obviously, is something that, Klinsmann and I guess the scouts, the rest of the coaches are looking at. But in terms of your opinion, I mean, what do you think of them bringing him into this camp when, we've talked about it. There's a number of names that, were left off in other areas that maybe could have been brought in.
I think that's where you start looking at your Sasha Kleistan and your Breck Shea is not making this roster. Is that spot right there, truthfully. Tim Ream in there, too. Those 3 guys, I think, lost out in the Julian Green sweepstakes. I think that's part of it. DeAndre Yedlin, another guy. And it's just a matter of time to figure out, matter of time as in the next 2 weeks here, what Klinsman's ideas were. And I actually do think that the younger guys might get trimmed.
Mm-hmm.
At least I think Yedlin does. We'll see how he does in camp. But just because Yedlin to me was a big surprise.
I was going to say, out of the young ones at the top of my mind, Yedlin is the one that I think will benefit from having been through the experience, but I don't see him being on the final roster.
Mm-hmm. And sticking with the midfielders, we're sticking with the defenders for now. It's a toss-up. I mean, I looked through this list, and it's like there's no one that just screams that, okay, let's lead this guy home. And you got Beasley, you've got the bookends. You got Beasley at one end, you got Yedlin at the other. And Yedlin's not even a guarantee either. Yedlin could easily make this roster, but he's just, when you take things at face value on paper, he's a guy that you just wonder and think that he's not going to make it. That leaves 9 guys that Klinsman has to take out 2 to 3 more out of. And I don't know. I look at this list, and there's no one just at face value that I say, you know what, they're not going to make it, because it's that wide open on the back line. And Omar Gonzalez, yes, he's been injured, but Klinsman wouldn't have included him if he was still injured. He was given the green light from the Galaxy training staff, so he's in camp. I quit. I quit on figuring out which defenders are gone, which basically puts me at the point of, in 2.5 weeks, I can't be shocked at who gets left off this roster. So in that case, I'm leaving the defenders alone.
Nick, leave the defenders alone.
Nick, leave the defenders alone. So midfield now. You look in the midfield, as we've said, this is the strongest group that I think that the men's national team has going for them. And just first look, I think my biggest question is, again, doing the whole youth versus experience. Does Julian Green make this roster? Because, again, it's the DeAndre Yedlin thing. I look, he's the first one I see, and it's just like, I don't see it happening. But then again, you don't know what Klinsman's mindset is. And I say that, if Green doesn't – I'm going to go ahead and just take Julian Green out. Brad Davis and Joe Corona kind of seem like guys that are on the edge a little bit. I think those might be your 3 that don't make it, and then you start looking around for a 4th, and I don't think you lose 4 midfielders. So I think you're looking at Julian Green, sadly Brad Davis, and Joe Corona might be your guys on the outside looking in. Which, even if they aren't, and you start wondering this is your MLS talent, truthfully, is your midfield, and you start looking at, holy crap, that guy got left off again. Again, as I mentioned, this is a good problem to have.
Right.
But it's I think we're going to learn a lot about where Klinsman sees this team, not only right now but in 4 years.
Yeah.
By the time that June 2nd rolls around.
I was reading the SB Nation Stars and Stripes FC. They had something breaking down the midfielders. And they made a point. They said, and I'll read it here. It says, there's the issue of Johnson and Beasley, both of whom can play in the midfield. If Klinsman thinks he's going to either use either of them with regularity on the left wing, that might cut out a spot for Discaru, Bedoya, or Davis, which is not something I had thought about.
No, but Bedoya, to me, Bedoya comes across as a guy that's safe. Like, I assume that he's in. I assume that he's going to start. And and he would be a name that if he gets left off, he's not one of the guys that, for me, is on the fringe in the midfield. At the same time, though, like I already said, the midfield is stacked. But no, Bedoya, to me, Bedoya, Bradley, and Beckerman are your 3 shoo-ins. Mm-hmm. That's my opinion. Those 3 guys are going to Brazil. Then you got everybody else after that, and then you toy with it from there. So, yeah, if Bedoya got left off, I think that would trump the Eddie Johnson exclusion from the 30 preliminary roster.
I look at it and I think Green personal opinion, I think this is, a Klinsmann, and you touched on it earlier. He's there because could be the future of U.S. soccer in the midfield. I think there's a really good chance that he's there for the experience, and then he gets cut too. And then I see Brad Davis personally as the other guy when I'm looking over these that is probably another one in line that's going to really have to fight for that spot.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, truthfully, a guy that comes on the edge more so, like when in the pecking order, I'm putting Maurice Adu teetering on the edge more so than some other guys. I mean, just because of the depth of the list. I think that
It's been a few years since Maurice Adu, piqued my interest.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if he gets left off, he would just be a ho-hum exclusion as opposed to a jaw-dropping exclusion.
Right. I would not bat an eye to it.
No. And up front, now, I say Josie, Landon, and Dempsey are safe. Those three guys are there.
Boy, bold statements here on this podcast.
Earth-shattering stuff. I'm going out on the furthest limb with all this. And so that leaves you with Terrence Boyd, Wando, and Johansson. Truthfully, I would not be surprised if Aaron Johansson versus Chris Wondolowski
for that
is for a roster spot. There's one roster spot to have between those two guys. I think, and as much as it pains me to say it, I think Johansson has proven more than Wando. And I know it's club versus country with what he's proven, but it's also Wando and San Jose, their style of soccer compared to what they play at Alkmaar and just the build-up that they have, whereas they're very physical in San Jose and you have a poacher. I think Johansson has an upper hand here.
Mm-hmm.
But that's just what Klinsmann's talking about. You count out Wando, and he's going to make you notice him.
Right. It'll be interesting to see because I think just even a year or 2 years ago, people didn't think. This roster a lot of this roster has taken shape just over the past little while.
18 months. I'd easily say 18 months. There are 10 guys from this 30 roster that made the preliminaries, 9 who went to South Africa 4 years ago. So that's 67% of this roster is green, for lack of a better term. These guys are brand new to this. This is going to be stuff that's, they're trying to fight for a spot that they haven't had before, which is scary when you look at who they have to face in the group.
Youth, inexperience, but talented youth and inexperience.
And I think that to bring things full circle, that's where the whole MLS can have a jumping off point in this World Cup based on, one, how this roster ends up shaking out, and 2, how they perform. Because I think a lot of people look at this group and look at this roster, and it's just based off of the names on the front of the jerseys for people to have the fear of the group. Because I do think that there is the talent there, but it's the inexperience that has people uneasy. And I think that that's going to be the biggest thing that once you come around to things in Brazil, those are going to be that inexperience and how they perform is going to be your biggest difference. So we want to thank Josh for joining us on the Diving for Penalties podcast. Josh,
I added so much insight.
You did, but tell the people how to find more insight from you.
If you would like to follow me on the twitter.com for really dumb jokes and things you probably won't understand most of the time between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m.
Accurate.
Follow me at Joshua Zavadil. That's JOSHUAZAVADIL.
Follow him, people. As always, again, you can follow the podcast at Diving for Penalty. At Yellow for Dive.
Do you even know what you're doing?
No, this is why I brought you on the show this week. At Yellow, the number 4 Dive, or you can follow me at Nick_Goulas. Thank you for listening to this episode of Diving for Penalties.